Hello and welcome to episode 143 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty. Today, my amazing friend Sarah Says is back on the show because we wanted to continue a tradition we started last year. In 2022, we covered Haunted Mansion in detail around Halloween. So this year, we wanted to go in depth into another Disney attraction that's a little spooky. Let's not waste any time and welcome Sarah Says back to the show. Thanks for being here, Sarah.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be back for this one.
Yeah, so last year we spent, I think it was like 4 episodes around Halloween talking about Haunted Mansion. We thought, hey, this is the epitome of the creepy Halloween ride at Walt Disney World, at Disneyland, at some of the other parks. They're different incarnations. This is the most Halloweenish ride in all of the Disney repertoire.
Yes.
But this year, there is one other ride that I think definitely deserves a deeper dive, and we are going to go into all of the versions throughout the world. We're going to call it the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror because that is the name of the first one. But
Yes.
There are 4 incarnations of Tower of Terror throughout the world at Disney parks, and we are going to talk about them today. But the first thing I want to get into before we start this and go into the different versions of the ride is to talk about specifically with the version at Walt Disney World, the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror, which is very much in line with the spookiness factor. How do you feel it compares to Haunted Mansion? Us being, I'm not going to say, like, this is going to sound weird, but older Disney fans,
Yeah.
like if we talk to our other co-host Marissa, this ride might seem more iconic to her because it's been there ever since she's been going to the parks. But
Right.
This ride opened like a year or 2 years after the last time I went as a kid. So I never saw this ride as a part of Walt Disney World until I was an adult. So how do you think it fits with Haunted Mansion as far as its iconic nature, but then also as its theming?
Yeah, it's kind of a hard question. When you first asked that, I was like, oh, it's not even the same kind of ride. Like I'm thinking like my brain's spinning. I'm like, oh, like this is hard. But like you said, it didn't even open till 1994. So, I mean, the first time I went, it was there, but it was still MGM Studios. So to me, that's different. Like, and it fits into the whole iconicness of MGM Studios. You know, that those of us, the elder millennials are like, oh, I miss MGM and all this, you know? But no, I think the Haunted Mansion, to be honest, is more iconic for its, what's the word? For its like,
I don't want to interrupt you or put words
Yeah.
in your mouth, but I think sort of what I feel you're trying to say is it has more of a cultural imprint. It has been
Yes.
there so long.
it's nostalgic.
It is original to the Disney parks, where
Yep.
all of the characters were created for the Disney parks. Now,
Correct.
this is based on an IP that is a very iconic intellectual property. The Twilight Zone existed way before even
Oh, yeah.
Walt Disney World existed. So,
Totally. No, that's exactly, yeah. It's where the Haunted Mansion is more nostalgic for a lot of people because it's been around for so long. And like you said, it was made original characters and all this for the parks. But the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror, it's also for people who like Marissa, who are younger. They probably see it as nostalgic as well because that's what they grew up going to see. Where I think it's just like a cool, iconic. It's iconic because of, you know, its imprint in the park. I mean, it's no other building looks like that. No other in the sight line, the way it is, the story that's told behind it. It's iconic in its own way, but I don't feel that it's as nostalgic as the Haunted Mansion.
and I do wonder, you know, you said as an elder millennial, and of course me being a Gen Xer, which is even worse, I guess, or I don't know better. I'm not going to get into that argument, but to have those distinct memories of going to MGM Studios and this not being a part of it, to me, this still feels like a new ride. So when I hear people talking about Tower of Terror being their favorite ride, being a ride that they were riding since they were a little kid and having all that nostalgia attached to it, it seems a little weird to me. But when you look at somebody who is maybe in their late 20s, like Marissa, like this was there the whole time. And this was always, whether you were riding it when you were a kid, this was always right down there at the end of Sunset Boulevard, being this presence. So I can understand a little bit how it could feel iconic, but I think what in my mind still gives Haunted Mansion that bump is it was created by Disney. Everything was a Disney original. Now, when we get into some of the other versions of Tower of Terror, we're going to get into some more original storylines, and that'll be unique as well. But you definitely have something you need to say right now.
Yeah, I just thought of it too, is that another thing too is you have to divide up those people who have grown up going to Walt Disney World versus the West Coasters who we may not have, because to me, I only rode that one time until I was a teenager when it came to DCA. And so the Haunted Mansion, you know, for people like me who grew up going to Disneyland and we didn't have that, that is another thing that I just thought of as well. That's like, hey, that could be another reason why, you know, that the Haunted Mansion is more iconic to people, is because we didn't grow up going to the Tower of Terror because we didn't go to Walt Disney World as frequently.
Right. And in California Adventure, Tower of Terror didn't open there until 2004, which was already trying to salvage a park that wasn't very popular at the beginning. And they were just sort of like throwing spaghetti up against the wall to see what would stick. And then they ended up changing it, which we'll get to a little bit later. But when we're talking about the Walt Disney World version to start, what it does have that Haunted Mansion really doesn't is a thrill factor to it.
Yes.
Now, you are way more into thrill rides than
absolutely
I am when it comes to theme parks. But what do you think adding that thrill element does? Because this was in a time when Michael Eisner was the CEO of the Walt Disney Company, and he had a teenage son, and that teenage son was like, you need to get cooler, you need to get hipper, you need more thrill rides. And this came in incredible theming, like theming on par or just a little bit lower than the Haunted Mansion, but they throw in that thrill factor. Do you think that makes it less accessible to a lot of guests and therefore is a detriment? Or do you think that the guests who are able to get that thrill where they can't get it in other areas of the theme parks, it is an advantage?
As being a thrill seeker myself, I think it's an advantage because not everybody, I'm just blanket statementing here, but people like the Haunted Mansion a lot, but it's a slow, cool ride, and it caters to literally everyone. Everyone can ride the Haunted Mansion. But Tower of Terror, it's for people who do want that kind of adrenaline rush as well as the spook factor. I mean, I think it definitely kind of ups the ante there. And I mean, ultimately, if you weren't being dropped down an elevator shaft, I feel like, you know, how the Haunted Mansion, you know, you just through the beginning to the end, you know, it's like, oh, I'm immersed in this. The only reason you're not, I feel like, in Tower of Terror is because then you get in your elevator and you get dropped, and then you're back and immersed in it when you get off. But yeah, I think so.
And I do think that none of these things happen in a vacuum, right?
Right.
Disney created the Hollywood Tower of Terror to go into MGM Studios at the time in Walt Disney World at a time where Universal Studios Florida had just opened. It was only a few years old when Disney is trying to throw in some more thrill rides because it was starting to get viewed as that park for kids and old people.
Mhm.
It was your grandma's park, it was their grandkids' park, and they were trying
Yeah.
to add some of these elements to it, and it definitely fit. It fit in with the original theming of Hollywood Studios. I know a lot of people right now aren't 100% sure what the theming is at Hollywood Studios, but I
Yeah.
still think that it does fit in a way. Before we get into the very specific details, because we both did some research into these rides, I want to talk about one thing that is a little weird about Tower of Terror in Walt Disney World, and that's that it kind of became the park icon
Mhm.
for Hollywood Studios. And it feels so weird to me having this be the park icon because I feel it should be the Chinese theater. Like, I just
Yeah.
feel like that is the obvious icon there. But it's so different than Cinderella Castle, Spaceship Earth, and of course the Tree of Life, which are, in the middle of the park, which are the big, quote unquote weenie in the middle
Right.
of the park to draw you down the main street. But here, this is off to the side. It would almost be like if Space Mountain was Magic Kingdom's icon. What do you think about this ride being used as the icon to Hollywood Studios? And does that maybe talk to the problem that park has in theming, that you're not really sure what this park is all about, so they just slap up one of the most popular rides?
Yeah, I mean, to be completely honest, I think the reason they use it is because people know what it is. They're like, "Oh, this is really recognizable." Everybody knows what the Tower of Terror is at this point because, like, we're going to talk about it, it's all over the world. It's in multiple parks. Where before, I mean, like when I went, I thought of the icon as that Mickey hat that was like right there but
I
it's like
never
I was
saw
also like,
that.
"Really?
I never was there for the Mickey hat. I completely
Crazy."
missed that entire era.
Wow. Okay. So yeah. So the Mickey hat to me is what I always thought of when I thought of Hollywood Studios. I feel like yeah, the Chinese theater, Grauman's Chinese theater, makes sense to be the icon, but people don't recognize it. They recognize it as the Great Movie Ride, and now they recognize it as Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. They recognize it as just that, not what it actually is supposed to be. So yeah, using something that people will see and immediately think, I know what that is. It's no matter who you are. I think that's why they just did it because they're like, this is easy. People know.
So let's talk a little bit about the ride itself. The version in Walt Disney World is the only one I've ever ridden, and I have ridden it one time. That was last year when I was still raising money in the fight against domestic violence through my trip in Ireland. And the one day I went with my other co-host, Marissa, and we decided if enough people donated money, I would ride Tower of Terror because I hate drops. I will say, I've said it before and I'll say it again, if you are afraid to go on this ride because you don't like drops, I don't like to push people into things if they're not ready for them, but I do think you might want to try it at least once. If you don't like it, you can totally be upset with me. You can say, whatever. You can throw a comment on this podcast and say, how could you possibly let me do that? But this is not as intense as they make it sound. And there is a factor of being pulled instead of free falling, which makes it sound like it would be worse, but it's actually better. You don't get that free fall feeling where your heart is like in your throat, which is what I didn't want, which is what always scares me about these situations. And I really liked it. I was videotaping myself for a vlog
That's right.
while I was doing it, and you can literally see my face like it's scrunched and I'm so scared for this drop. And then it happens and my face just lights up like, oh, that wasn't that bad. Like, why was I so scared of this thing? So I do want to say, try it if you think you can do it. If you're wondering if you can do it, give it one try. I am not a person who pushes people onto rides if they're not ready. I think a lot of people who avoid this one can do it. And Disney's Hollywood Studios just doesn't have enough rides. So if you are looking to spend the day there, you're going to want to get on as much as humanly possible so that you can enjoy your day.
Yeah, my husband, it's funny that you mentioned that because I was talking to my husband about this and he is not a thrill ride person either. And he has ridden, I don't remember if he rode Tower of Terror, but he definitely rode its new iteration in California Adventure. And he said the best place to sit is in the back corner because you're against the wall. You have a railing to hold on to and a handbar next to it. And you're like smushed in the corner. So he's like, I felt so secure. And he's like, I'd ride it again if they let me sit in that seat.
So I'm going to tell a story, and I've always wondered if I was ever going to tell this story, but it's just too funny. So we're in line, and I am like freaking out, right? Like, I am not looking forward to this. I'm shaking. Marissa's next to me like, you don't have to do it if you don't want to do it. You don't have to do it. I'm like, the people, they gave money. Like, I have to do it at this point. And she's like, well, just know that you don't have to do it, and hopefully that will make it easier on you. But we're saying this in line as they're putting us into the numbers, like as they're getting us ready. And the woman next to me goes, you can hold my hand if you want to. And I am like, I've been hit on in some situations, but being afraid to go on a drop ride at Walt Disney World is not one of them I ever thought was going to happen.
That's so funny.
I'm like, here I am thinking I'm like an 8-year-old who's afraid to go on a ride. But anyway, so the theming of this ride is what really did, I wanted to make sure if this was the only time I was ever going to do it, that I tried to appreciate it, because the drops, they were going to happen no matter what. I couldn't avoid them once we started moving. So enjoy the theming. And this is really immersive, from the queue when you're in this old 30s hotel. And I love old time Hollywood vibes. Like, I lived in Los Angeles for a little bit, and I really connect to those old Hollywood vibes. What Michael Eisner said was my favorite quote: the Hollywood that never was, but always will be. And this really has that feel to it. And there's cobwebs, but you can tell that they went through the detail of building a classy hotel and then making it look like junk. They didn't build it to make it look like junk. They built classy and then junked over it, which was perfect. And you can miss a lot of the theming in this queue if you're scared. If you get a lightning lane, you can miss a lot of this to just really get to appreciate it. Take pictures. Look at those pictures later, because you're going to miss things on vacation that later, when you're looking back on your stuff, you're going to notice. And then you get on that ride, you start moving forward, and you're on a drop ride. And you start moving forward, and you're like, how did they do this? And when you think about just the technology and the advancement that goes along with making sure this thing runs with precision, it's incredible.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And the fact that they paid so much attention to detail, even on the part of the ride where you stop at the beginning and the doors open and you see you're in that hallway, and the apparitions are in front of you, and it's like you're looking down a hallway into a hotel, and it's like the fact that it's that cool. It wasn't just bam, the doors open and there's a screen in front of you. So it's super cool.
Because this is a thrill ride and not like the Haunted Mansion and a slow moving dark ride, Omni Mover ride, it goes by really, really fast. So you'll end up waiting a while for it unless you have a lightning lane. And then it does go by really, really quickly. But I do think that this is worth it to sit through the wait especially if you like thrills.
Yeah, no, I agree. And especially the one that's in Hollywood Studios, it's so unique from every other park. It is the only one that has the system where it runs, what's the word, autonomously? Like it actually moves. It doesn't just pull you back and you go straight up. You actually move through a room. And so getting that experience too is so cool because like anytime I've gone to Disney World and Hollywood Studios, it's like, well, if I'm with someone who's only ridden the California version, I'm like, no, you have to ride this one just for this part of the ride because it makes your ride experience so much different. It's like it's still a great ride no matter where you ride it, in my opinion, but that gives it that little something extra because it does give that cool little motion thing. I was always terrified of it when I rode it there because I'm like, what if we don't get on the track right?
And going back to me being a Gen Xer, you being a late millennial, I kind of wonder how much the intellectual property of the Twilight Zone resonates with a lot of guests, because this was something that even when I was a little kid was only on reruns on like Nick at Night, and I don't even know if it was on Nick at Night or not, but it feels like it was on Nick at Night. Like, to know the Twilight Zone, it was already like our grandparents' show or our parents' show. So to sort of revitalize that intellectual property, it's really interesting because Disney didn't own it. Right. Disney has to pay for that intellectual property. And instead of building an original ride like they did with Haunted Mansion, they thought that that IP was important enough to attach it. Now, what do you think before we move on? Because this is really going to be a big part of the next version. Do you think Tower of Terror is going to be Tower of Terror, specifically Twilight Zone Tower of Terror in Walt Disney World for that much longer? Or do you think that this is going to get taken over by some other intellectual property at some point?
That's tough because I've thought a lot about this. And today when I was kind of doing the rest of my research and like reading, and I'm like, they revamped, which we'll probably talk about with Paris, the Tower of Terror, which, like I said, we'll talk about. But it's hard because I feel like there would be a massive uproar, which, I mean, there's massive uproar about everything. But if they were to change it like they did DCA and it just slowly started to go away, I think it would be almost detrimental to the brand at some point, because having that unique Tower of Terror in Florida and then having the unique version in California Adventure, people, like, as we found with other things and IPs, if you make it exactly the same in every park, people aren't going to want to keep going to the different parks to see it. It's like, okay, well, it's cool they're putting, like, going to the Haunted Mansion, putting the Hatbox Ghost in at Magic Kingdom, but you know what? I've already seen the Hatbox Ghost 1.5 billion times at Disneyland Resort. So if you change over the IP to something completely different than Tower of Terror, then I'm probably, unless it's something totally different than California Adventure, then I'm probably not going to be that interested to go and check it out. Just my personal opinion.
Right. So we're going to move on to Disney's California Adventure because that's sort of going to tie into this conversation. In 2004, Twilight Zone Tower of Terror opened in DCA, but then it closed in January of 2017, 3 days into 2017.
Yes.
And now it is Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout. So just getting back to Walt Disney World for 1 second, I don't think we're going to get a Guardians re-theme of Tower of Terror, because over in Walt Disney World in Epcot, they have Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind. So if we're going to get a re-theme to Tower of Terror, in Hollywood studios, it's either going to turn into something maybe a little more generic, something like we'll talk about a little later in Tokyo,
Yeah.
or it's going to be a completely different IP, maybe something Pixar, maybe a movie that
Monsters
will,
Inc.
right, just show up at some point that we don't even know about that will be a huge hit, the next Frozen or
Right.
whatever. But I don't think it's going to end up being Guardians of the Galaxy. However, you really love Guardians of the
I love
Galaxy Mission Breakout,
I
and you
love
got
it.
to experience the DCA version of Twilight Zone Tower of
Yes.
Terror. So I'm going to let you take the mic for a little bit and
Oh, okay.
talk about the old version of Tower of Terror at DCA, where it differed from the one at Hollywood Studios, and then talk about why you love Mission Breakout so much.
Yeah, so the biggest difference that just stands out in my mind the most is what I just talked about, and it's the ride mechanism on Tower of Terror at Hollywood Studios. Is that one is so much more unique. It's so cool, and the one in DCA is you go through the same kind of thing. You go through the lobby, you go through the cool room at the beginning and the pre-show, and then you go into the boiler room and you walk through. Though the boiler room in DCA, I feel like had more hidden things in it and has even more hidden things in it now that it's Mission Breakout. But I don't remember because it has been so long since I've ridden the one at Hollywood Studios. Did they have the gardens you walk through when you go through the queue at the beginning? Because DCA had gardens you walked through. When you go in and you turn, there was like this whole outside queue that was kind of like gardens and stuff before you made it into the lobby.
All
Um,
right, here's what I have to say about the one in Walt Disney World is Marissa has the DAS pass, so we
oh, so
did
you
not
skip all
have to
that.
wait in line
Okay.
for it.
Okay, no, that makes sense. I just can't remember. So if it does, then great. But yeah, and so you get on, but the difference too with the way the ride works in California Adventure is there are two cars simultaneously running on the same track on all 3 bays. So as you're loading, the car above you is going and bouncing and doing its thing, and as soon as you move back, they move into your spot and start unloading and reloading. So they can get a lot of people through, which is awesome. So yeah, so that definitely is something that is much different than Hollywood Studios. Oh, and the other thing too that I thought was really interesting. So the building itself at Hollywood Studios had to be designed to be seen from Epcot because you can see it from Morocco. So they actually had to design that Tower of Terror to fit into the facade of Morocco, even though they're in separate parks, because you can see it. Whereas the Disney California Adventure version, you see it from the parking lot or you see it from the hotels or you see it. So it doesn't matter what the back of it looks like.
Okay. I do have to just chime in here because this is one of those things that us Disney nerds love. So actually, when she says you can see it from Morocco, you can't see it from Morocco. What happens is if you're across
That's
World
right.
Showcase Lagoon from Morocco and you are staring at that pavilion, you can
Yes, the
see
sight
Tower
line.
of Terror over in Hollywood Studios. So they created it so it fits in with that
Yes,
skyline. So if you're
that's
like at
right.
the Odyssey building
Yeah.
in Epcot, you can see it. That is a great point. That is one of the things that Disney used to do that I kind of
Hmm.
miss,
Yeah.
especially when you are in Epcot and you're looking from the Odyssey building towards Morocco and they make Tower of Terror fit in with the skyline there. But then you look just to your right and you see the Swan and Dolphin Hotel, which is just huge and ugly and just towers over everything. And you're like, so in between these two things, well, actually, the Swan and Dolphin was there earlier. But at some point, they decided we don't care about this monstrosity
Yeah.
over here, but we care about this over here. But that
Yeah.
is a really, really good point. But I want to
Yeah.
get into the change to Mission Breakout.
Yes.
And I know you like this change. So talk
I
about
love
that.
it. I love Mission Breakout. Like I I really like Tower of Terror, but I love Mission Breakout. And the changeover, I mean, literally, I was in California when they started taking apart Tower of Terror. And it was so weird to see them removing the signs and all of that because my aunt and uncle owned a business like literally down the street. So you could see from where they worked. And it was like, it was so cool. But yeah, so it was they used all the same stuff, but they just rethemed it all as Guardians. So now you walk into that lobby and it's been gutted, and now it's the collector's room. So it's like, oh my gosh, I look up and I can see there's Figment hidden up in those
There is a hidden
things.
Figment.
There's hidden Figment. There are hidden Rocket Raccoon paw prints everywhere because as you go through this storyline, you're learning, oh my gosh, they've been kidnapped by the collector. Well, Rocket is the one who's trying to get them out. There's an animatronic Rocket Raccoon, for crying out loud. It's like, it's the best thing ever.
That's where we're going to leave things off in this episode. We have so much more to discuss when it comes to Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout, and we still have 2 more international versions of Tower of Terror to analyze. That will be next Thursday on Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Until then, have a great week and a happy Halloween.